Her reflection never told the whole story, and maybe that was the gift, because she learned early that strength couldn't be measured in symmetry, that beauty wasn't something that could be edited into existence. But the world handed her a mirror and asked her to shrink, asked her to conform, to apologize, to fit into a standard someone else invented. But she refused, because deep in her bones, before she ever had the words for it, she knew she was not here to be beautiful. She was here to be powerful. She was here to be powerful, not here to win approval. She was here to change the narrative. She didn't fit in, so she decided to stand out. Not because she wanted to rebel, not because she craved attention, but because something deep inside of her whispered, "You were never made to shrink." The world tried to put her in a box. A small, silent, obedient little mold. But the fire inside her was never meant to flicker. It was born to blaze. And no matter how many mirrors told her she wasn't enough, no matter how many stares made her question her presence, she stood anyway. She stood anyway. At first trembling, unsure, wounded, but standing all the same. She cried in secret. She wrestled with shame. She asked God why she couldn't just be normal. But in time, she realized normal never changed the world, and her strength wasn't in looking like everyone else. Her strength was in rising anyway, with eyes wide and heart open, carrying every scar like it was stitched in gold. She stopped trying to fit in. She stopped apologizing for her voice. And that's when the world started to listen, not because she shouted, but because she stood in a truth that couldn't be shaken. They called her too different, but she made it different. Her signature. Her uniqueness became her superpower. What they tried to use against her, she used to rise. Because when you stop fighting to belong, you start learning to lead. When you stop begging for approval, you start walking in purpose. And she made a choice, not to wait for someone to invite her into the circle. She became the circle. She didn't beg for a seat at their table. She built her own. She built her own. And with every brick of rejection, she built something that couldn't be burnt down. She stood out, and in doing so, she gave others the courage to do the same. They whispered behind her back, but she kept walking forward. They judged her exterior, but they never saw the weight her soul carried. Her soul carried. And still she smiled. Still she showed up, because her strength was never in being accepted. Her strength was in rising despite the absence of applause. She didn't need validation to bloom. She didn't need a crowd to believe in her. Her self-worth came from a well much deeper than public opinion. It came from surviving the moments no one knew about and still choosing love over bitterness. And now, when she speaks, people listen, not to her image, but to her impact. Not to how she looks, but to how she makes them feel. Because the most powerful people in the world aren't the ones who are adored by all. They're the ones who dare to be real when it's easier to pretend. She didn't fit in. She didn't look the part. But she lived the truth. And that is what the truth. And that is what makes her unforgettable. She realized eventually that the mold the world made was far too small to hold her magnitude. Her energy, her softness, her strength. She was never meant to be contained. She was meant to expand, to stretch beyond expectation, to overflow into spaces that never thought they needed her presence. They tried to define her by lack, but she became the definition of abundance. Abundant faith, abundant love, abundant resilience. She didn't just survive rejection, she transformed it. She didn't just endure isolation, she elevated through it. And now, every time she walks into a room, she carries a presence that doesn't ask for permission. She carries the essence of someone who knows their value without needing it to be echoed back by the world. That's what standing out means. It's not about being seen for your exterior. It's about being known for your soul. And the truth is, her journey hasn't been easy. It's been uphill. It's been heavy. It's been lonely at times. But she chose to use every hardship as training ground, every setback as spiritual soil. She sowed her tears like seeds, and now she walks in a garden of resilience, not because it was easy, but because she refused to give up. And even when her voice shook, she spoke. Even when her knees buckled, she stood. And even when the world didn't clap, she kept dancing. Because standing out is not about proving anyone wrong. It's about proving yourself right. It's about rising to meet the version of you that was always there beneath the layers of doubt. She stopped chasing perfection and started chasing perfection and started chasing purpose. And that purpose rewrote her path. That purpose painted her in a light that no criticism could dim. So now, when little girls look at her, they don't see someone who gave in. They see someone who gave her all. They don't see someone who fit into a standard. They see someone who shattered it and rebuilt it into something wide enough for every kind of beauty, every kind of strength, every kind of soul that's ever been told, you're too much, or you're not enough. She became the living proof that you don't need to shrink to be loved. You don't need to change to be chosen. You just need to be brave enough to be yourself, fully and fiercely. She didn't fit in, but instead of bending to belong, she broke through the walls. She broke through the walls. She didn't become smaller to be liked. She became bolder to be heard, and she paid the price. But what she gained in return was far greater than popularity. She gained peace. She gained peace. She gained power. She gained the kind of strength that no filter could manufacture. The kind of beauty that doesn't fade with age but grows deeper with every act of courage, every boundary honored, every truth told even when it trembled. The world still tries to label her, but she no longer answers to names that don't honor her spirit. She answers to a resilient. She answers to a leader. She answers to a warrior, a light bringer, hope holder. She answers to the sound of her own voice rising above doubt. And when she walks through fire, she walks taller, not smaller, because now she knows fire doesn't burn her. It forges her. They judged her surface, quick glances, hushed whispers, sideways stares. They saw the shape of her nose, the way her smile wasn't atypical, the way her body didn't mirror the posters they plastered on the walls of what society called a beautiful. They measured her with a ruler that was never made for her. And so they dismissed her, not realizing that what they saw was barely the beginning of who she truly was. Because her power didn't reside in the mirror's reflection. It resided in the fire that refused to go out inside her soul. They missed her spirit, the part of her that didn't bow when it was easier to break. They missed the silent courage it took to walk into rooms that didn't welcome her and still carry herself like she belonged. They missed the storm she had already survived, the battles no one clapped for, the nights she prayed herself to sleep, the mornings she rose anyway. They missed the resilience braided into her being, stitched into her from every tear she'd wiped away with her own hands. They didn't see how she made pain her platform. They didn't notice how she stopped shrinking just to make others comfortable. They overlooked the radiance that came not from skin, but from soul. From a relentless decision to keep showing up in a world that told her she didn't fit. She never asked for approval. She stopped waiting for permission. Her journey became less about looking right and more about living true. Every cruel comment turned into a brick, and with those bricks, she built something holy. A spirit untouchable, a presence unforgettable. While they obsessed over her surface, she was building something eternal within. Her dreams weren't shaped by their opinions. Her voice didn't echo their judgment. Instead, it rose above it. They didn't hear her silent declarations in the dark. I am worthy. I am enough. I was made for more. They didn't know she was rehearsing strength when they were rehearsing judgment. Because true power doesn't come from looking the part. It comes from living through what tried to break you and still choosing joy. Her beauty wasn't in the symmetry of her face. It was in the way she refused to disappear. Her beauty wasn't in the softness of her skin. It was in the toughness of her spirit. She was grace under fire, a lighthouse in the storm. And every time she stood tall in the face of ridicule, she reminded the world, worth is not measured by the eye, it's measured by the heart. Her story wasn't pretty, no, not in the way storybooks are written, not wrapped in ribbons and sealed with fairy tale endings. It didn't glide on smooth roads or unfold with picture-perfect moments. Ooh, her story was carved through chaos, written in the ink of rejection and rewritten in the blood of resilience. It was built not on applause, but on ache, on silent battles, on nights when the tears wouldn't stop and mornings when the world didn't care that she was still getting up. But still, she got up. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't chase validation because she wasn't trying to be pitied. She was learning how to rise. Her voice didn't quiver because she was weak. It trembled because she was speaking, even when it hurt. She was speaking even when it hurt. That kind of strength doesn't come from ease. It's birthed in adversity. Her story had scars, but they were sacred. They didn't make her less. They made her real. And real is rare. People often miss the power in her pain. They were too focused on polish. But she knew deep down that there's a strength born only in struggle, a fire found only in the ashes. Her wounds weren't her shame, they were her wisdom. She carried them not like chains, but like armor. Her brokenness didn't make her bitter, it made her bold. She wasn't built to be admired for her perfection. She was built to move hearts with her truth. And the truth wasn't pretty, it was raw. It was jagged, it was honest. But it was hers, and that made it powerful. And because her story wasn't meant to be a fairy tale, it was meant to be a light. A beacon. It was meant to be a light, a beacon. A reminder that someone out there is still fighting their own battle, and they're not alone. Her pain had purpose. Her journey had weight. And when she stood in rooms that tried to define her by what she'd been through, she simply stood taller. Because she knew those cracks. They let the light in, and that light became her testimony. So no, her story wasn't pretty, but it was powerful. And that power, the kind that comes from surviving what was meant to destroy you, can't be faked. It can't be denied. It changes people. It wakes up the silent ones. It heals the unseen wounds of those who needed one more reason to believe they could make it too. Her story didn't need approval. It didn't need editing. It just needed to be told. Because somewhere, someone's story starts where hers refused to end. She never waited for permission to be enough. Because somewhere along the way, she realized no one was going to hand her that permission slip. No one was going to look her in the eye and say, and now you're worthy. No crowd was going to rise to its feet and applaud her into self-belief. Self-belief. She stopped waiting. She stopped shrinking. She stopped living her life according to someone else's measuring tape. She stood in the silence of her own soul and whispered, I am already enough. I always was. And from that moment, everything changed. Because when you stop asking for validation, you start reclaiming your voice. She didn't need the world's approval to take up space. She didn't need the mirror to agree with her spirit. Her beauty didn't need to be confirmed. It was lived. In her grit, in her kindness, in the way she kept choosing to rise even after being torn apart by words that were never meant to nurture her. Her worth wasn't negotiable. It wasn't placed on a shelf to be appraised by others. It was embedded in her breath, wrapped in her existence, sealed by her very survival. They called her too much, too loud, too bold, too soft, too sensitive to refuse to apologize for being whole. Because broken systems will always call wholeness a too much. But she didn't belong to systems. She belonged to truth. She belonged to grace. And every time she looked in the mirror and saw herself as already enough, 1,000 invisible chains fell off. That's what happens when a woman walks fully in her identity. Walls crumble, standards tremble, and the atmosphere shifts. She wasn't perfect, but perfection was never the goal. Growth was never the goal. Growth was. Courage was, becoming was. And you don't become by staying small. You don't grow by waiting to be chosen. You become by choosing yourself again and again and again. Even when you're overlooked, even when you're doubted, even when they roll their eyes or scroll past or try to clip your wings before you even fly. She knew the world wasn't always going to clap for her, so she built an applause inside her own chest. Every heartbeat said, I'm still here. Every breath said, I'm not giving up. And when doubt crept in like a thief in the night, whispering lies like lullabies, she didn't fight it with fists. She fought it with truth. She reminded herself that her presence is a purpose. Her voice is a victory. Her survival is a statement. She turned her back on the idea that she had to do more, be more, achieve more just to earn her place. No, she already had a place. She already had a light. She already had a light. She already had value that cannot be erased by rejection, erased by silence, or erased by comparison. She never waited for permission to be enough, because she finally understood that being enough was never something she had to prove. It was something she had to remember. And once she did, she started walking differently, speaking differently, choosing differently, choosing differently. She began to say no to what drained her and yes to what called her higher. She stopped asking, am I good enough? And started saying, I'm here and I matter. And not because of what she could produce or who approved of her, but because she was breathing. That was enough. That was enough. That was everything. And here's the truth she now lives by. You are not required to meet someone else's definition of enough. You are not here to be edited or filtered or fixed. You are here to be fully and freely yourself. The world may not always be ready for that, but that doesn't mean you dim. That doesn't mean you shrink. That means you shine. Anyway, she stopped asking the world to approve her existence. Stopped waiting for the right moment to believe she belonged. She didn't need a magazine cover to feel worthy. She didn't need applause to keep going. She didn't need applause to keep going. Somewhere between rejection and rebirth, she realized that no one else's opinion could define her value. And from that moment on, she walked different. She didn't ask if she was too much. She asked why the world demanded so little. She didn't tone herself down to make others comfortable. She expanded, she evolved, she erupted into everything she was meant to be. Because when you know who you are, you stop asking people to explain it to you. Her power wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing herself. And in doing that, she became undeniable. Not just to the world, but to herself. That was the moment her true beauty emerged. Not when the lighting was right or the makeup perfect, but when she stood fully in her truth and said, I'm enough, as I am, because I am, because I am. She didn't chase standards, she set them, and that's a beauty no one can take away. She is not a headline, she is not a trend, she is a revolution in skin and bone and spirit, and no beauty standard ever created can contain what lives inside her, because her strength is not in how she looks, it's in how she lives. The world often makes the mistake of looking only skin deep, of weighing worth in jawlines and waistlines, forgetting that the heart is where power lives. And oh, if they could have seen the weight her spirit carried. The kindness she gave when cruelty would have been easier. The forgiveness she offered when bitterness would have made sense. They judged her by what she wasn't, but what they couldn't see is what made her unforgettable. She was fierce in compassion, bold in her hope. Oh, relentless in her belief that she could rise even if no one clapped. What they missed in shallow judgment, God crowned in unseen favor. Because her strength wasn't about lifting weights. It was about lifting herself up, day after day when the world tried to pull her down. She didn't wear her pain like armor, she transformed it into empathy. She didn't need validation, she had conviction, she didn't need approval. She had purpose, and that was her beauty. The kind that never fades, never cracks, never ages. The kind that heals others just by being real. They told her she was different like it was a warning. Like a different meant wrong, but different never meant broken. It meant chosen, it meant set apart. It meant that she was called to walk a path most wouldn't dare to step on. And when the world tried to clip her wings so she could fit inside its cages, she decided to outgrow the cages instead. She chose to let her uniqueness be her superpower. Her voice didn't sound like theirs. Her face didn't match the cover of a magazine. Her energy didn't fit into boxes. And thank God for that, because she wasn't built for ordinary. She was built to wake people up. She wasn't created to blend in. She was born to stand out in ways that moved people's hearts. Her presence alone reminded others that there is no mold for greatness, Her glow came from surviving the fire, not avoiding it. And once she stopped trying to be accepted, she finally became unstoppable. Some stories aren't written in smooth sentences. They're written in jagged moments, in tear-stained pages and nights no one saw. And hers was that kind of story. It wasn't filtered, it wasn't easy. but it was filled with glory. Every rejection built her resilience. Every insult became the brick she stood on. She didn't need a pretty past to have a powerful future. She wore her truth like a crown, not because it was polished, but because it was honest. Her battles gave her authority, her wounds gave her wisdom, and even when it hurt to speak, she used her voice anyway, because someone needed to hear that survival was still possible. Her story didn't ask for sympathy, it sparked something in others. Something that whispered, "If she can stand, I can too." She turned shame into strength, silence into songs, and the very things she once hid became the reason she became a light in someone else's dark. They pointed at the curve of her spine, the scar across her face, the way she didn't quite fit into the boxes they'd built for women like her. They called her flawed, whispered it behind her back, posted it without mercy, and disguised it as advice laced with pity. But she had already walked through the fire and made it out with ashes still in her hair and courage still beating in her chest. So, she didn't flinch. She didn't crumble. She didn't absorb their judgments as truth. She looked in the mirror and said, "You're not flawed. You're a force." She learned that fear doesn't disappear just because you're brave. It just stops being the driver. And even though she was scared sometimes, scared of rejection, scared of failure, scared of never being fully seen, she walked forward anyway. Because courage isn't loud, it's quiet. It's quiet. It's the decision to keep going when no one claps. It's the moment you speak when your voice trembles. It's the way she kept showing up for her life, even after the world told her she wasn't enough to be in it fully. People said she was too broken to be whole.